Let me ask you something. Have you ever had a thought about yourself and believed it immediately, not questioning it, not investigating it, just believing it? I'm not good enough. I'm always behind. I'm terrible with money. People always leave me. I don't have what it takes. I've tried this before. I always mess things up. I'm just not disciplined. I'm not that type of person. Now, here's the question I want you to sit with. Who told you that? If nobody actually told you, when did you decide it was true? Because sometimes the most powerful thing controlling your life isn't what's happening around you. It's the explanation you've created for what's happening around you. And that's what I want to talk about today. I welcome you all into Thoughts of the Challenge. And I am your host, your boy Mito. And we are back with another session about breaking down everyday challenges that you and I face so drastically. And for those who need the help, for those who ask for the help or look for the help, I am here to help. This is not positive thinking, not pretending everything is perfect, not waking up tomorrow and saying, I'm rich, I'm successful, I'm unstoppable, while your bank account is looking at you like, bro, let's be realistic. I'm talking about something much deeper. The story your brain creates, the story you repeat, the stories you eventually become. Because here's the uncomfortable part. You can live inside a story that was never actually true. If you repeat that story long enough, your brain can begin treating it like a map. Let's start with something everybody understands. Think about the last time somebody didn't text you back. That's it. Nothing dramatic. You send, hey, what's up? 5 minutes, nothing. 20 minutes, nothing. An hour, nothing. And suddenly your brain has produced a Netflix series. They're mad at me. I probably said something wrong. They don't want to talk to me. Maybe they don't like me anymore. Now, 2 hours later, they finally respond. Sorry, I was working. And you're sitting there thinking, oh, that's it. Your brain just spent 2 hours building a disaster movie because somebody was busy. We've all done some version of this. You walk into a room and somebody stops talking. Your brain says, they were talking about me. Your boss says, can we talk tomorrow? Your brain says, I'm getting fired. You make one mistake at work. Your brain says, I'm terrible at this. You have one bad relationship. Your brain says, I'll never find somebody. You fail at one business idea. Your brain says, I'm not an entrepreneur. Do you see what happened? Something happened. Then your brain gave it meaning. And sometimes the meaning becomes more powerful than the event itself. Your brain is trying to make sense of the world. This is where neuroscience becomes fascinating. Your brain isn't simply sitting there waiting for reality to happen. It's constantly interpreting information. Researchers increasingly study perception through predictive processing frameworks, where the brain uses prior expectations and incoming sensory information to help make sense of what's happening. The exact mechanisms are still debated, but the broad idea is useful. What you expect can influence what you notice and how you interpret ambiguous information. Think about walking into a dark room. You see something on the floor. For half a second, your brain might think it's a snake. You turn on the light, it's a belt. The belt didn't change. Your interpretation changed. And that's important because sometimes we've walked through life with the lights off. We're interpreting situations using old information, old experiences, old fears, old beliefs, old wounds. Now we're calling those interpretations reality. Here's where it gets personal. Imagine a kid growing up constantly hearing, you're lazy, you're not smart. Why can't you be more like your brother? You've never finished anything. Maybe that kid grows up, gets a job, starts a business, has a family, becomes successful, and somewhere inside, that sentence is still playing. You never finish anything. So they start something. Things get difficult. And then what happens? They quit. They say, see, I knew I couldn't do it. But wait, did they quit because they were incapable? Or did they quit because the moment things became difficult, their own identity became louder? That's the question. And this doesn't mean every difficult behavior comes from childhood or trauma. Human behavior is complicated, but we do know that learned experiences, expectations, attention, and memory can influence how people interpret new situations. So ask yourself, what belief about myself did I learn before I was old enough to question it? That's a serious question because you may be trying to build an adult life with beliefs you learned as a child. The inner critic. Let's talk about that voice, that one that says you should be doing more. You're falling behind. Look at everybody else. You don't look good enough. You're not successful enough. You wasted too much time. You should have figured this out already. But here's the strange part. Sometimes we think that voice is helping. We believe if I criticize myself enough, maybe I'll finally change. But constant self attack isn't the same thing as accountability. You can hold yourself accountable without destroying yourself. There's a difference between I made a bad decision and I'm a bad person. One describes behavior, the other attacks identity. That's the huge difference. Because if you believe your behavior can change, you have somewhere to go. If you believe your identity is defective, where do you go from there? The difference between I failed and I am a failure. Listen to these two sentences. I failed. I am a failure. They sound similar. They're not. I failed leaves the door open. I am a failure closes it. One describes an event. The other describes identity. And this is where I want you to start paying attention to your language. How do you describe yourself? Do you say, I'm bad with money, or I haven't learned how to manage money well yet? Do you say, I'm lazy, or I've struggled with consistency? Do you say, I'm terrible at relationships, or I haven't learned how to communicate the way I want to? That little word, yet it creates space, and space creates possibility. Now, let's give our brain shortcuts. Let's get into cognitive biases. Your brain has an enormous job. Every second you're dealing with sight, sounds, memories, emotions, decisions, social information, and internal sensations. You don't consciously analyze everything. You couldn't. So the brain uses shortcuts. Those shortcuts can be incredibly useful. But sometimes they can create distorted conclusions, and that's where we get into trouble. Bias number one, confirmation bias. Let's say you believe nobody respects me. Now you walk into a room, someone doesn't say hello, your brain notices. See? Someone compliments your work, your brain says, you're just being nice. Someone asks for your opinion, you barely register it. Someone criticizes you, you remember it all day. What's happening? Your brain is selectively giving you weight to information that fits the story. Confirmation bias. It's a tendency to favor information that supports existing beliefs while giving less weight to contradictory information. Now, here's the question. What if you've been collecting evidence for a story without realizing you're the one doing the collecting? Bring that back. What if you've been collecting evidence for a story without realizing you're the one doing the collecting? That's powerful because maybe the world isn't constantly telling you that you're not enough. Maybe your attention has become trained to find evidence that you're not enough. That's different. And if attention can be trained, it can also be retrained. Bias number two, negativity bias. Let's say you post something online. You get 99 positive comments. One person says you suck. Which comment do you remember exactly? That one. You can have 99 people saying keep going, but one negative comment crawls into your head at 2 a.m. like it pays rent. Why? Humans have strong tendencies to prioritize negative or threatening information in many situations. From an evolutionary perspective, noticing potential dangers could be extremely useful. If your ancestors missed a beautiful sunset, probably not a big deal. If they missed a predator behind a tree, different story. So your brain learned to pay attention to threats. The problem is modern life gives us thousands of tiny threats: notifications, emails, arguments, social media, bills, traffic, work, comparison. And now your brain can spend the entire day scanning for what's wrong. So ask yourself, what percentage of my attention goes towards wrong versus what's actually working? Bring that back. What percentage of my attention goes towards what's wrong versus what's actually working? I'm not telling you to ignore the problems. I'm asking you to notice whether the brain has become addicted to fighting them. Bias number 3, availability. Here's another one. You watch 5 videos about people losing their businesses. Suddenly, entrepreneurship feels dangerous. You watch 10 videos about people becoming millionaires. Suddenly, everybody seems rich. You see stories about violent crime, the world feels terrifying. You see stories about perfect relationships, your relationship starts to look inadequate. Your brain doesn't have a direct access to every event happening in the world. It has the information available to it. And vivid, emotional, easily remembered examples can influence judgments about how common and likely something is. That's part of what psychologists call availability heuristic. So here's the question. Is my perception of reality based on reality or based on what my attention keeps consuming? Rewind, bring it back. Is my perception of reality based on reality or based on what my attention keeps consuming? That's a different question. Social media makes this even more interesting because now your brain isn't just consuming your environment. It's consuming an algorithmic selected environment. You might open your phone for 5 minutes. You see someone bought a house. Someone got married. Someone launched a company. Someone lost 50 pounds. Someone is traveling. Someone bought a Lamborghini. Someone is celebrating their 10th anniversary. Someone is making $30,000 a month. And you look at your own life. You're sitting on the couch, eating leftovers, and suddenly you feel like you're losing. But here's what you didn't see. You didn't see their debt. You didn't see their arguments. You didn't see the failed business before the successful one. You didn't see the years before the photograph. You're comparing your behind the scenes to somebody else's highlight reel. And your brain doesn't care. It just sees evidence. They're ahead. I'm behind. They're winning. I'm losing. Now ask, who benefits from constantly believing I'm behind? That's worth thinking about because attention is valuable and the stories you consume become part of the environment your brain learns from. Your memories are not perfect video recordings. Here's another piece that changes the way you understand yourself. Memory isn't simply a perfect recording that gets played back. Human memory is reconstructive. When you remember something, your brain reconstructs the experience from stored information and the context in which you remember it. That doesn't mean your memories are fake. It means memory is more dynamic than a video file. And this matters because the story you tell about your past can influence how you understand your present. Think about this. I've always been bad at this. Always? Really? Can you remember every single day of your life? Probably not. Maybe what you're remembering is a handful of emotional, powerful experiences, and your brain has connected them into a story. I always felt that's not a memory. That's a conclusion. And conclusions can be questioned. Let's make this real. Imagine someone says, I've always been bad with money. Let's investigate. Maybe they grew up watching their parents struggle. Maybe nobody taught them financial skills. Maybe they made some terrible decisions in their 20s. Maybe they experienced an emergency. Maybe they accumulated debt. Now they're 35 and they say, I'm just bad with money. But what if the truth is I never learned the skills I needed? Those are two completely different identities. One says I'm broken. The other says I have something to learn. And if there's something to practice, there's an opportunity for change. That's where neuroplasticity enters the conversation. Your brain is capable of changing through learning and experiences. So the goal isn't to magically delete every negative thought. The goal is to create new experiences that give your brain better evidence. I'm going to give you 3 steps to rewrite the narrative. Step 1. Catch the story. Before you can change a thought, you have to notice it. So for the next week, Listen to these words always, never, everyone, no one, I can't, I'm just, that's who I am. Those words should make you pause because they often sign that your brain has compressed a complicated life into one simple conclusion. Someone doesn't call you. Nobody cares about me. You make a mistake. I'm terrible at everything. You get rejected. Nobody ever wants me. You struggle financially. I'll always be broke. Pause and ask, what actually happened? Not, what does this mean about me? Just what actually happened. That's the first separation between event and story. Step 2, question the story. Now become a detective, not a prosecutor, a detective. Ask, what evidence supports this belief? Then, what evidence contradicts it? And then the big one. What would I believe if I wasn't afraid? Let's say your story is, I can't start a business. Okay, what's the evidence? Maybe you failed before? Fair. But what evidence says you can never learn? Maybe there isn't any. Maybe you've never actually tested the idea properly. Maybe you lack experience. Experience can be built. Maybe you need help. Help can be found. Maybe the first attempt failed. That doesn't make the second attempt impossible. It means the first attempt produced information. Failure becomes data when you stop using it as identity. Step 3, create new evidence. This is where you stop talking because eventually you have to move. You can journal for 10 years. You can listen to podcasts every morning. You can highlight every neuroscience book on your shelf. At some point, you have to give your brain a new experience. If your story says, I'm not disciplined, wake up and keep one promise. If your story says, I'm afraid of talking to people, have the conversation. If your story says, I never finish anything, finish something small. If your story says, I'm not creative, create something. If your story says, I can't change, change one behavior, not everything, one thing, because now you're giving your brain evidence. You're saying, wait a minute, I thought we couldn't do that. And you respond, apparently we can. That's how story starts changing. Boom. The question I want you to ask yourself, what if confidence isn't something you wait for? What if confidence is partly the results of accumulated evidence? You keep promises to yourself. You begin trusting yourself. You take action. You survive discomfort. You discover you can handle things. Your brain receives new information. And eventually the story changes. Not because somebody told you to think positive, because you experienced something different. And that's a much stronger foundation. Your future self is built through evidence. Let's imagine 2 people. Person A says, I want to become healthier. But every day they tell themselves, I'm terrible at this. They miss one workout. I knew it. They eat badly. I'm hopeless. They quit. Person B misses a workout. They say, okay, that happened. Tomorrow, I go again. Same mistake, different narrative. And over 6 months, those narratives can produce completely different behavior. That's why the story matters. Not because thoughts magically create reality, but because thoughts can influence intention, emotions, decisions, and behavior. And behavior creates consequences. Consequences create experience. Experience feed learning. Learning changes future behavior. That's the loop. What if your story is old? This is the part I really want somebody to hear. You might be living according to information that is outdated. Maybe you were rejected 10 years ago. You're still protecting yourself from rejection. Maybe someone told you you weren't smart. You're still afraid to try. Maybe you failed at something once. You're still treating that failure like a prophecy. Maybe you grew up believing money was always scarce. You're still operating from scarcity even when your circumstances have changed. Maybe someone hurt you and now everyone has to pay for something they didn't do. That's not because you're a bad person. That's because the brain learns. Some predictive processing models of trauma suggest that prior experience can become powerful expectations, influencing how ambiguous situations are interpreted. This is an active area of research, not a complete explanation of human behavior, but it offers useful framework for understanding why old experiences can influence present perception. So ask yourself, what am I reacting to today that actually belongs to yesterday? That's a heavy question. You don't have to believe every thought. This might be one of the most important things we can learn. A thought can exist without becoming your identity. You can think, I'm going to fail and still try. You can think they're going to reject me and still introduce yourself. You can think I'm not good enough and still show up. You don't need to eliminate fear before taking action. You need to stop giving every thought a voting right. Some thoughts can sit in the room and still not make a decision. Story doesn't have to become positive. And here's something I want to make very clear. I'm not asking you to replace every negative thought with some ridiculous positive affirmation. If you're struggling, I'm the greatest person alive. Might not feel believable. Try something more honest. Instead of, I can do anything, try, I can learn. Instead, I'm not afraid, try, I'm afraid, and I'm going to take one step. Instead of, everything will work out, try, I don't know what will happen, but I can handle the next step. That's believable. That's grounded. That's usable. So here's the challenge. I want you to take these three questions with you. Question one, what story am I repeatedly telling myself? Not what your parents think, not what your partner thinks, not what social media thinks. What story are you repeating? Question two, is that story completely true? Not emotionally true, not familiar, not something you heard 1,000 times. Is it actually true? What evidence supports it? What evidence challenges it? Question three, what action could I take today that would give my brain new evidence? Not next year, not Monday, not when you feel ready. Today, one action. Because the brain learns from experience and your life is full of experience waiting to teach you something different. The bigger picture. Maybe the goal isn't to become a completely different person. Maybe it's to stop allowing an outdated version of yourself to make decisions for the current version of you. Think about that. The person who experienced the failure is not necessarily the person standing here today. The person who was rejected is not necessarily the person you are now. The person who made the mistake is not necessarily the person who has to repeat it. You have learned. You have changed. You've survived things you once thought would destroy you. And sometimes we forget that. We remember the pain, but forget the adaptation. We remember the failure, but forget what it taught us. We remember who hurt us, but forget how much stronger we became afterwards. So maybe tonight, don't ask yourself, what's wrong with me? Ask, what happened to me? What did I learn from it? And is that lesson still serving me? That's a different conversation because maybe the voice inside your head isn't your enemy. Maybe it's an old protection system. Maybe it learned to keep you small because small felt safe. Maybe it learned to expect rejection because rejection once hurt. Maybe it learned to expect failure because failure became familiar. But familiar doesn't mean inevitable. And a prediction isn't prophecy. Your brain can make predictions. You can still question them. Your brain can learn patterns. You can practice different ones. Your brain can remember the past. You can create new experiences in the present. That's the beauty of neuroplasticity. The past leaves fingerprints, but fingerprints aren't handcuffs. And now I want to bring you back to something simple. You wake up tomorrow, you have responsibilities, bills, work, family, traffic, messages, problems. Life doesn't suddenly become perfect because you understand neuroscience. You're still going to have bad days. You're still going to get rejected. You're still going to make mistakes. You're still going to have moments where the old voice shows up. The difference is maybe this time you recognize it. Maybe instead of, here we go again, you say, I know this story. Maybe instead of believing it, you question it. Maybe instead of obeying it, you take one different action. And maybe that one action becomes another, then another, and another until one day you look around and realize I'm not living the story I used to tell myself anymore. I'm living the evidence of the person I've become. So here's the question I want to leave you with today. Not a motivational question, a real one. What story have you been carrying that you are finally ready to investigate? Because maybe the next chapter of your life doesn't require you to become someone completely new. Maybe it requires you to stop believing everything the old version of you learned. And maybe the first step isn't changing your life. Maybe it's changing the question you ask yourself when life doesn't go your way. Instead of, why does this always happen to me? Try, what is this teaching? Instead of what's wrong with me, try, what pattern am I looking at? Instead of, can I really do this? Try, what is the next thing I can learn? Because questions change where your attention goes. And where your attention goes, your behavior often follows. So pay attention to the story. Pay attention to the voice. Pay attention to the questions. Because every day your brain is learning from you. The question is, what are you teaching it? And with that, I bring you Thoughts of the Challenge. And I am your host, your boy Mito. I thank you all. Much love from this side of the screen into the next. We will continue on with this storyline in the next go round. I will see y'all then. Please keep going. Please keep asking. And I will surely keep on giving you what I got. Thank you. Much love.